Welcome to another video lecture by Utkal Digital Classes. I am your tutor for the course, and today we are going to learn about current and electricity. The important topics from this chapter include electric current in a conductor, current density, electric resistance, current and temperature, electric power, combination of resistors, resistance, color codes, Wheatstone bridge, Kirchhoff's laws, grouping of cells, galvanometer, meter bridge, and potentiometer. We start our discussion by talking about the electric current in a conductor. Electric current is basically electrical charges in motion. What you should notice, electrical current is denoted by I and its unit is ampere. We say that the current through a conductor is said to be 1 ampere if 1 coulomb of charge is flowing per second through a cross section of the wire. Okay. Also, some important points that you should notice. First of all, the conventional direction of current is in the direction of the flow of positive charge or the applied field. Also, the conductor remains uncharged when current flows through it because the charge entering at one end is equal to the charge leaving at the other end. So, in this section, we'll briefly talk about different aspects of current and try to get a formula for current based on some material properties. So first of all, let's talk about conductivity. Based on conductivity, you have three types of materials: conductor, insulator, and semiconductor. In conductors, the outer electrons of each atoms or molecules are only weakly bound to it. So these electrons are almost free to move throughout the body of the materials. For insulators, what we have is effectively no free electrons. So the conductivity or the flow of electrons is quite less in insulators. In semiconductors, however, the behavior is just like an insulator at low levels of temperature, but at higher temperatures, a small of the electrons get excited and get free and thus constitute a current in the system. We should first talk about the behavior of conductor in absence of an applied potential difference. So when there is no potential difference inside a conductor, what happens is the average displacement and the average velocity is zero. Okay, so let x be the displacement and v the velocity. So if I take the average of these quantities, they are zero when there is no external field. When external field is zero, these are zero. Are the electrons not moving in the material at the time? No, that is not the case. The electrons are moving, but they are moving with their thermal speed, which is given by Vrms is equal to root 3 k T by m. And because this motion is haphazard and in all the directions, when you take an average, it turns out to be zero. You should take note of some quantities such as the average current. Average current is nothing but dq delta q by delta t, or amount of charge delta q flowing through a cross section of a wire or a conductor through a time small delta t. Also, instantaneous current is provided by dq by dt. These are one things that you should note. Next, what happens if I start applying a potential difference? When I connect my conductor's ends to a battery and apply an electric field which is non-equal to zero, okay, then what happens is this field will exert. For example, if I'll just make my material, it has many electrons inside it. Okay, in the absence of any electrical field, the motion is haphazard and in all directions, so the net average velocity is zero. But in the case of an electrical field being applied, here I have two contacts, let's say positive and negative of the battery. Then what happens is all the electrons that are there inside the system are attracted towards the positive end. Okay, so what happens is the field, whatever field I'm applying, will exert an electrical force on these free electrons, and each electron will start to accelerate. So what is the acceleration given by? Acceleration is the electrical force divided by the mass of the electrons, which is minus E by m. Okay. Now we talk about the concept of drift velocity. This is an important formula also, and it has been asked directly in the papers. So drift velocity is defined as the velocity with which the free electrons get drifted towards the positive terminal under the effect of a potential difference applied across the ends of the conductor. Okay. So what happens is my electron generally has thermal velocity, but now because I have given it an acceleration by applying a force, the electrons acquired velocity tends to be in the direction towards the positive terminal. Okay, so there is basically a gain in velocity due to this applied field, but the problem is inside inside the material there are multiple ions, and the electrons are trying to move through them, either through them. Okay, so because I have thousands of such ions available, what happens is an electron cannot easily pass through and reach the other end easily. So what will happen is after some time, small time t, it will collide, then it will collide again, then it will collide again, it will keep on colliding. So even though the acceleration is very high, the due to maximum multiple collisions, the velocity of the electron does not go extremely high. So this can be explained very easily. So let's say that at any given time I give my electron a velocity v is equal to v1. So for one electron is equal to u1 plus a times tau 1. Tau 1 is the time which is known as which is first of all defined as the total time taken by the number of collisions, and it's known as the relaxation time. It is known as the relaxation time. It is basically the average time between two collisions of the electrons. So what does this mean? If I have these ions, an electron comes and collides here. So what will be the time before the second collision? Maybe here or maybe here, anywhere. But what will be the time before the second collision happens? So that is given by this. And another quantity that we define is mean free path, given by lambda, is the total distance traveled by number of collisions. What this again tells you is the length it travels between two collisions, the average length. Okay, you should remember these things because factual questions have also come from these in the exams before, and non-factual questions, which are formula based questions, have also come in the past. So let's return to our problem at hand. Let's just say that there are multiple electrons in a system. Let's say this is my cylinder and there are multiple electrons here. Now for one electron my velocity is v1 is equal to u1 plus a times tau 1 before the collision happens. Similarly I can have v2 till vn, okay, if n electrons are there in the system. Now if I try to calculate the drift velocity, so drift velocity is basically the average of all these velocities. So my vd is equal to v1 plus v2 plus till vn divided by n, okay, which is nothing but u1 plus u2 un plus a times t1 plus t2 tn divided by n. I'm just opening this up for each, but we already know that the first quantity that I've shown you, this quantity is the average initial velocity, which is 0, and this quantity is 0. So what we get is I get my vd is equal to only the second quantity. My vd is equal to a times tau It's nothing but minus E by m tau. Okay, this is a very important formula which I have given here as well. My drift velocity is my acceleration is into the relaxation time, and it's given by minus E by m into tau. Okay, having this in mind, I can write the current flowing through a conductor with a cross section A and number of electrons per unit volume is given by small n is given by I is equal to NEA VD. This is probably the most important formula that you should remember from here, and it will be very useful as we go ahead. Next, we look at current density. Current density is again a vector quantity, and it's in the direction of the flow of current in the system, or the flow of positive charges. Its magnitude is given by dividing the current's magnitude divided by the area of cross section, and current is found by taking a dot product of current density and the area element. Okay, this is basically to specify the current with a direction at every point. This will be very useful as we go ahead. Note that because this is a dot product, so if my cross section is at an angle to the direction of current, okay, so my J will be in this direction and my dA will be in this direction, then we'll have to take the dot product. Okay, next let's quickly discuss about electrical resistance in the system. What is resistance? Electrical resistance is basically the resistance of a conductor to the flow of electrons inside it. So what really happens is, when I apply a potential difference across a conductor, the free electrons get accelerated, and because of this extra acceleration they collide with positive ions and their motion is thus opposed. Okay, so this opposition offered by the ions is known as the resistance of the conductor. So there is a famous law which is the Ohm's law, which is a plot between the V and I, and it gives a linear plot. Okay, so V by I is tan theta is equal to R, where R is known as the resistance. Okay, if I talk about this microscopically, I can see this very clearly. I had I is equal to NEA VD. Now I just substituted the value of the magnitude of VD here, so it's E m by tau. Okay, and then I club the terms together, NE square tau by m into AE. Okay, next I can also write I as NE square tau by m into A by L into V. How? Because V is equal to E dot L. So if I multiply this and divide this equation by L, what I'll get is I'll get A by L into V. So I can write my current in terms of V itself, and from these things what I can see is, if I just transpose this to the left side, okay, I'll get something similar to this, and we are defining this quantity m by NE square tau as resistivity of the system. So this is known as resistivity, and the inverse of resistivity is known as conductivity. This is known as conductivity. Ohm's law can also be written as J is equal to sigma times E. Okay, where sigma is equal to NE square tau by m. So it can be expressed in both forms. J is equal to sigma E as well as V is equal to IR. Okay, note one more thing from here, that resistance is equal to rho into L by A. So it depends on the dimensions of the conductor and its resistivity. Next is just a formula based question. The drift velocity of electrons when 1.5 ampere of current flows in a copper wire of cross section 5 millimeter square is given by V. If the electron density in copper is given to be 9 into 10 to the power 28 per meter cube, the value of V in millimeter per second is close to, and you're given the value of the charge of the electron. So this is a simple formula based question, that is why I told you to remember this one, and these are all previous year's questions, so their probability of coming in the paper is high. So I is equal to NEA VD, where I need to find the VD. So VD is nothing but I divided by NE into A. All the values are already given to you. So I have 1.5 divided by 9 into 10 to the power 28 into 1.6 into 10 to the power minus 19 into 5 into 10 to the power minus 6 is equal to 0.02 millimeter per second, or basically the first one is the answer. Another quick point to note is the dependence of resistance on temperature. So the resistance is given as R is equal to R naught 1 plus alpha theta, and what to take back from this is, if the temperature of the conductor increases, if the temperature goes up, the amplitude of the vibrations of the positive ions in the conductor also increases. So what happens is, due to this, the free electrons that are there inside the conductor will collide more frequently with the vibrating ions, and as a result the average relaxation time will decrease. So tau will decrease. You can note from here that the two slopes are tan theta 1 and tan theta 2, and previously we saw that tan theta is similar to the resistance. That is why R1 is greater than R2 as T1 is greater than T2. Let's look at the next question. The space between two concentric conducting spheres of radius A and B is filled with a medium of resistivity ρ. The resistance between the two spheres will be given by what? So let me just try to draw the spheres for you. I have two concentric spheres, and then let this be the center. One has a radius A, another has the radius given by B. Now let me draw another circle here, but let's draw it with another pen because it's slightly different from this. Okay, so we have to take element of the infinitesimal element of this material, and let me just draw this material quickly. Okay, this is not to scale, but let's say that this is uniform. So I have from the center, this is at a distance x, and the small distance is given by dx. Okay, and now coming back to the question, I can write this down as dr. Sorry, I have my dr is equal to rho into dx divided by 4 pi x square. Okay, this is a given. Now to find total resistance, I have to integrate my elemental resistance dr over the entire volume. Okay, so integral of dr is nothing but rho into integral from a to b of dx divided by 4 pi x square. You can easily find this integral out, which gives me resistance is nothing but rho by 4 pi into minus 1 by x from A to B, or resistance is equal to rho by 4 pi 1 by A minus 1 by B. Next, let's look at two of the laws given by Kirchhoff, which are useful in determining the potential difference and current in different branches of any complicated network. So the first law is the junction law, which is based on the law of conservation of charge. It says that in an electrical circuit, the algebraic sum of the current meeting at any junction in the circuit is 0. Or in layman terms, I can say that the sum of the currents entering the junction is equal to the sum of the currents leaving the junction. For example, this is the junction, and I have, let's say, some 4 currents, I1 coming in, I2 going out, I3 coming in, and I4 going out. So what I mean is, at any junction there should be no accumulation of charge, so whatever is coming in must go out. That is why I have I1 plus I3 is equal to I2 plus I4. Okay, this is one of the fundamental laws that you will be using. The second law is known as the loop law. And what does the loop law say? It says that in any closed circuit, the algebraic sum of all potential differences and EMF is 0. Okay, so what this actually says is, if you're moving from a negative to a positive terminal inside the cell, EMF is taken as positive, while moving in the direction of the current in a circuit, the potential drop across the resistance is taken as positive. Okay, this law is based on conservation of energy. We'll look at several examples to elucidate these principles. Let's look at a question to find the equivalent resistance. So how do you find these things? We have to find the equivalent resistance between the point A and between the point B. So in order to do that, let's assign number 1 to A. So what I'll do is, I'll just assign the number 1 to A. So everything that is connected to this number, to this wire, everything that is connected to this wire before encountering some resistance or a battery will be given the same potential. So this is the potential 1. Similarly, here there is no resistance. Here on both these ends there will be a potential 1. There will be a potential 1. Okay. Similarly, I can give a potential 2 here. So 2 will be present here. Similarly, 2 will go from here to here, and 2 will be present here, and 2 will be present here. Okay. So what do I see? In order to go from 1 to 2 or A to B, this is my A. Now in order to go from A to whatever the second resistance is, I can either go by this way, okay, or I can go by let's say I follow this. Okay, I can go by this way, like in this way. Okay, 1 to 2 again. Okay, also by doing this I can reach to the end B. These two are basically at the same end B. Similarly, I can even reach from 1 to 2 by going along this path. Okay, so what do I see here? This is nothing but 3 things in parallel and B here. And what happens if you have 3 resistances in parallel? You get 1 by R equivalent is equal to 1 by R1 plus 1 by R2 plus 1 by R3 is equal to 3 by R. That implies R equivalent is equal to R by 3. So this is a very easy approach to these problems. You just start assigning voltages and then potentials to different parts of the circuit, and then see how can you reach from one part to the other part? Okay, and write all the possible ways of doing that. Let us take a look at the next question. When the switch S in the circuit shown is closed, then the value of the current I will be given by what? So these will utilize the Kirchhoff's laws. So let me say that the value of the voltage at the point C is X. Okay, so I know from the Kirchhoff's first rule, that current in the junction, current at the point C implies I1 plus I2 is equal to I. So the net current flowing in is the net current flowing out. Now how do I find I1 and I2 and even I? Here is another question. When the switch S in the circuit is closed, then the value of the current I will be given by what? So you have a junction C here. You first need to apply the Kirchhoff's current rule, which says that I1 plus I2 is equal to I. So the current flowing into the junction is equal to the current flowing out. Now, how do you go about doing this? There are two ways to write this, and I'll take one at a time to simplify this. So I have VA minus the potential drop across the 2 ohm resistor I1 into 2 is minus VC is equal to 0, or I can just write this as is equal to potential at C. So you start from a point and you pass through several things, be it resistors, batteries, capacitors, inductors, and then you reach a final point. So if this point is, let's say X, let's say if this point is Y, then you have Vx minus whatever potential drops keep happening, and is equal to the final voltage that you get at the end, final potential. This is the basic idea. So for the first loop that I have shown here, it's given by this. For the second one that I have shown here, you have VB minus I2 into 4 is equal to VC. And similarly for the third one, I can easily write that VC minus I into 2 is equal to 0, because the final voltage is 0. Just substituting the values, this easily becomes 20 minus I1 into 2 is equal to VC. Now let's just say VC is equal to some value X is equal to X. Similarly, we have 10 minus I2 into 4 is equal to X, and you have X minus I is equal to 0. Now you just use the Kirchhoff's first rule and write this down. What do we have here? We can easily write that my I1 becomes 20 minus X divided by 2. My I2 becomes 10 minus X divided by 4, and my I becomes X divided by 2. Substituting it back, I can easily find that this reduces to 20 minus X by 2 plus 10 minus X by 4 is equal to X by 2. Now you simply need to solve this. First of all, you can easily cancel out the 2's in the denominators. Okay, so you have 40 minus 2x plus 10 minus x is equal to 2x, and this implies this is minus 3x, this goes here, becomes 5x, and 40 plus 10 is 50. So 50 is equal to 5x, or x is equal to 50 divided by 5 is equal to 10. So the value of the potential at x is equal to 10. Now I can easily find the current I, because current I was given by x by 2, which is nothing but 10 by 2 is equal to 5. Let us take a look at another question. Identical resistance of resistance R are connected as in the figure. You are supposed to find out the net resistance between the points X and Y. So let me just redraw this again. I have my X here, then I have a resistance going to some point. I have another resistance going to some other point. Then I have from here 3 resistances in parallel to a point B. Then I have another resistance from here till here. Similarly, I have another resistance on this end till the point Y. Here also I have 3 resistances in parallel. And while going down, I have resistances given like this. Okay, so let me just mark these points. So this was my mark this as A, this as G, this as F, this as Y, and all these resistances are R. Now you can see that these 3 are in parallel. Okay, and this can be easily reduced to X. Then you have a resistance R, then you have another resistance R, and you have another resistance R. All these are R. Then there is a R by 3 here because you took 3 resistances in parallel. You have another R by 3 here, and then you have R and R. Okay, but here you see that these 4 resistances are satisfying the Wheatstone bridge condition that P by Q is equal to R by S. That is why there will be no current in this branch. Okay, from F to G there will be no current, so I can just remove this from the circuit, and what am I left with? I am left with X with having a resistance here, a resistance this side, R by 3 here, R by 3 here, and R here and R here. So R, 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 R by 3 and R by 3. You can easily see that this is a parallel combination, and my R is equal to 1 by 2R plus 3 by 2R plus 1 by 2R is equal to 5 by 2R, which implies R equivalent is equal to 2R by 5 between X and Y. Let's quickly look at some definitions. EMF or electromotive force is the potential difference across the terminals of a cell when it is not giving any current. So in the circuit you will often find that the cell is given by this symbol. So the EMF is the potential difference between its two ends when there is no current passing through it. The terminal voltage, which is V, this is EMF denoted by E. The terminal voltage is the voltage across, or voltage or the potential difference across the terminals of a cell when a current is being drawn from it. And what is internal resistance? Generally cells are made up of electrolytes, so the resistance offered by the electrolyte of the cell when some electric current flows through it is known as internal resistance. So generally internal resistance is given by the small r in the system, and it's generally written like this. So it's close to the negative potential or the negative terminal of the battery. This is the positive terminal, this is the negative terminal, and This resistance is generally your internal resistance of the cell. Next, we look at grouping of cells. So whenever cells are arranged in series, like it is shown in this first figure in front of you between A and B, then the equivalent EMF provided by the cells is given by the sum of the EMFs of all the cells, and the equivalent internal resistance is the sum of the internal resistance of all the cells. Okay. Note that when you're writing these things, you need to write the EMF with the right polarity. What does it mean? For example, I can have a circuit where there are cells like this arranged. Okay. Then if I want to calculate the EMF and I take this to be the direction of the current, okay, then what do I mean by this? What I mean is these two have the same polarity, let's say positive, and these two have the different polarity, which is negative. So when I add these, I will be adding E1 plus E2 minus E3 minus E4. Okay, so these things should be kept in mind. We'll look at plenty of examples to elucidate this thing. Let's look at what happens in parallel. If I attach these cells in parallel, where these are their internal resistances, then E equivalent EMF is given by epsilon by R1 plus epsilon 2 by R2 till epsilon n by Rn divided by 1 by R1 plus 1 by R2 till 1 by Rn. Remember that this was the equivalent resistance in the system. So on a resistor, you will find 4 rings in total, 3 like this and 1 at the end. So the first strip is known as the strip A, the second strip is known as the strip B, and the third strip is known as the third strip C, and then D. The first two strips tell you about the first two significant figures. The third strip tells you the decimal multiplier, and the fourth strip gives you the tolerance. So you need to memorize these things somehow. You can use different mnemonics. One thing that I found quite useful is red to violet is the red to violet is similar to VIBGYOR without the indigo present there. So you have black and brown on top, and you have gray and silver at the bottom. Okay, so you can see it like this. Black is a pure black is one extreme, white is the other extreme. Then you have brown, and then you have gray, which are not the extremes but close to white and black respectively. And then you have something similar to a VIBGYOR in the center. So you can use whatever method you want to use, but at the end you should be knowing these 10 values. And for example, if I tell you that my code is let's see, orange, I have orange as A, I have green as B, I have black as C, and I have uh, silver as D. So what does this mean? In the strip A, orange means that my first significant figure is 3. My second significant figure is green. Green is 5. Then what is the decimal multiplier? 10 to the power. You have black here, so black is 0, 10 to the power 0, and the tolerance is silver is 10%. Okay, so 10 to the power 0 is nothing but 1, so you get 35 plus minus 10%. Let's look at the next question. A carbon resistance has the following color code. What is the value of the resistance? So you are given the first 3 strips as green, orange and yellow, and the last one as golden. Okay, so as golden is 5%, So first of all, you can just eliminate this option. It's easier to remember gold, silver and no color as because there are only three options. Now you are left with the rest three. Now what is green? As you can remember, green corresponds to 5, orange corresponds to 3 and yellow corresponds to 4. So what do we have? We have 553 into 10 raised to the power 4, which is 5 point, which is 530 kilo ohm plus minus 5%. So the answer is the first one. To end the lecture, we will look at some of the electrical devices and instruments that are used to measure the strength of current, voltage, and resistance in the systems. The first device that I will look upon is galvanometer. The galvanometer is an instrument that will be used to measure the strength of the current in the system. And how does it do that? It does that by measuring the deflection of the coil due to the torque produced by a magnetic field passing through it. So I have given you the diagram of a galvanometer here, or the symbol of the galvanometer. You should know what these terms are. This is the galvanometer. It will be represented by G, and there is something known as the shunt resistance. So shunt is basically a small resistance which is connected in parallel to the galvanometer coil, and this is done so that there is a control of the current flowing through the galvanometer. So you do not want a lot of current to pass through the coils of the galvanometer, or it will heat up and maybe even burst. So in order to avoid that, you have a small resistance RS. RS is very small as compared to, let's say, G. So the current that is flowing in the system, let's say I outside, because of the low resistance path offered by the shunt, very less amount of current enters the galvanometer. So what you should take home from these things is, first of all, the current passing through the galvanometer will be termed as Ig, and the current passing through the parallel shunt will be known as I minus Ig. Based on the current passing through the galvanometer, there will be a deflection in the galvanometer's coil, and it will give us an estimation of the current that is flowing in the circuit, that is I. Let's look at the first one, which is the conversion of a galvanometer to an ammeter. So a galvanometer can be converted into an ammeter by connecting a low resistance in parallel to its coil, which I have already shown in the previous diagram. So I is known as the range of the ammeter. In questions, they will directly give you the range of the ammeter, so you should know some of the nomenclature. So I is range of ammeter. Okay. Ig is the current required for full scale deflection. Ig is the current required for full scale deflection. Okay, and Rg is the resistance of the galvanometer coil. Okay, and you should know that you can easily calculate the value of the shunt resistance that needs to be applied in parallel. And how is that done? You basically have the same potential drop across both. So you have that Ig into Rg is equal to I minus Ig into Rs. From that you can easily find the value of the shunt that you need to provide in parallel. The next thing is conversion of galvanometer to voltmeter. And how is this done? This is done by applying a very high resistance R in series to the voltmeter. Okay, this resistance is given by V by Ig minus Rg, and again the same thing here. The current flowing through both of them will be the same. Okay, so in order to find R, you will simply have the equations Ig into R is equal to V minus Rg into Ig. Okay, as the potential drop between the ends of the voltmeter. So these are just basic equations, but you should just remember that in the voltmeter case, high resistance R is very high, it's added in series, and in the ammeter case it is added in parallel. Okay, some key points that you should notice: the rate of variation of deflection depends upon the magnitude of the deflection itself, and so the accuracy of the instrument. So sometimes they will ask you about the accuracy, so that all depends on the rate of the variation of deflection of the instrument. Okay. And one more thing that you should notice: if the current for a deflection, which is the maximum current I talked to you about, that for full scale deflection you had a current as Ig was full scale deflection. However, if the current for a deflection of one division of the galvanometer scale is K, and N is the total number of divisions on one side of the zero of the galvanometer scale, then Ig is equal to K into N. You might not need these formulas in the paper, but it's better to have a brief understanding of these. Let's look at a question governing galvanometers. A galvanometer having a resistance of 20 ohms. So my galvanometer resistance Rg is equal to 20 ohms. Okay, and there are 30 divisions on both sides of the galvanometer, and it has a figure of merit equal to 0.005 ampere per division. Now the resistance that should be connected in series such that it can be used as a voltmeter up to 15 volts is given by watt. Okay, so there are many things to note from this. First of all, what is the deflection current? To find the deflection current, it is basically equal to the current flowing G max. Okay, this is for the deflection current, which is equal to your N into K, where N is equal to the number of divisions and K is equal to your figure of merit. So you should try to remember this formula. I'll mark it with a star. These all have been asked previously. So the deflection current is Ig max is equal to N into K, where N is the number of divisions, which was given to you as 30, and K was the figure of merit. So if I just substitute these values, I get my deflection current is nothing but 15 into 10 to the power minus 2 is equal to 0.15. Now given this, I need to find my V is nothing but Ig into 20 plus R. Okay. Note I am just making this diagram for you so that it's very clear. This is, let's say, a point A. Then you have a series resistance in series. Then you have the galvanometer G. Okay, and then you have a point B. Note that galvanometer will generally be attached parallel to these 2 points to find the voltage. Nevertheless, V is equal to Ig into 20 plus R, the potential drop across A and B. Okay, and what is this equal to? That implies it's given that the voltage is 15 is equal to 0.15 20 plus R, which is nothing but implying that 100 is equal to 20 plus R, or R is equal to 80 ohms. Let's solve another problem. The galvanometer deflection when key K1 is closed but K2 is open equals theta naught. On closing K2 also and adjusting R2 to 5 ohms, the deflection in the galvanometer becomes theta naught by 5. The resistance of the galvanometer is then given by each of these following four. So how do you approach this question? First of all, they've given you that when key 1 is closed and key 2 is open. So my first case is K1 closed plus K2 open. Here, what is the current that is flowing through the galvanometer? My Ig is equal to whatever E is given by 220 plus Rg. Okay, where Rg is the resistance of the galvanometer, is given as C times theta naught, where C is a constant. Now when both the keys are closed, K1 closed plus K2 closed. First of all, you know what happened in the first case when K1 was closed. So this circuit was closed, but there was no current flowing through this branch. Okay, and because this has no resistance, so whatever current was there in the branch was flowing through this, and this was your Ig. Okay, now in the second case, you are closing both K1 and you're closing K2 as well. Okay, so this is basically like applying resistance in parallel to the galvanometer. Okay, now when you insert both of the keys, the current that will be flowing through the galvanometer will change. It will now become 220 plus the equivalent resistance of 5 and Rg. So it's 5 Rg by 5 plus Rg. Okay, because R2 is given to be 5 ohms. So you have these two in parallel, and then it's multiplied by this is being given as C theta naught by 5, because in this case what is happening is both the loops are in parallel, thus the current divides itself. Okay, given this, I can easily write this as 5 times C divided by 225 Rg plus 1100 is equal to C theta naught divided by 5, or I can easily write this as E by 220 plus Rg is equal to C theta naught. Okay, let me give the values. Let's say I'll call this 2 and I'll call this 1. If I just divide 1 by 2, I get 225 Rg plus 1100 divided by 1100 plus 5 times Rg is given by 5. If you just solve this linear equation, you will get 5500 plus 25 Rg is equal to 225 Rg plus 1100, which gives you the value of Rg to be 22 ohms, which is one of the options that has been given to you. Another interesting system that needs to be studied is the Wheatstone bridge. This configuration that I've shown you here is known as the Wheatstone bridge. If the current in the galvanometer becomes 0, this Ig is equal to 0, then we say that the bridge is balanced, and under that condition Vd is equal to V at B. That implies I1P is equal to I2R and I1Q is equal to I2S. That implies P by Q is equal to R by S. This is the condition for a Wheatstone bridge to be balanced. Okay, note that if P by Q is less than R by S, then VB is greater than VD, and thus current will flow from B to D. However, if P by Q is greater than R by S, that implies VD is greater than VB and current flows from D to B. These are the only things that you should keep in mind. Later you will be looking at meter bridge, which is a application of the Wheatstone bridge. Next, we quickly look at the principles of meter bridge. A meter bridge is used to measure an unknown resistance of a wire. Okay, the setup has been shown to you in the diagram here. This is the setup for the meter bridge. You have a 1 meter long wire between A and C. Okay, you have a known resistance box between these points A and B. Okay, similarly you have an unknown resistance. Let's call it S here because we've been studying Wheatstone bridge before. So let's call this as S. And then what you know from this is, first of all, you can easily find out the resistance between the points A and B, and you can easily find it out between the points B and C as well. Okay, now let me tell you what these things are. First of all, we have connected a cell across the 1 meter long wire between AC, and I have connected a galvanometer. This is my galvanometer between a jockey and a midpoint. So this is my jockey, the point B is my jockey, and D is the midpoint. What the whole idea behind this is, we need to find the unknown resistance by doing what? By touching the jockey at different positions on the 1 meter long wire, and we need to find the balance point of this system. Balance point in the sense, if this acts as the the Wheatstone bridge, then I have the resistance between A and B I can call it that as P. Similarly, resistance between B and C I can call that as, let's say, Q. Okay, and the resistance box can be called as R and the unknown as S. Okay, and so let's just read some of the things. So if AB is of L centimeter, it need not be 1 centimeter. If AB is equal to L centimeter, and we can easily write BC as 100 minus L. This is the first thing that you should remember. Okay, now as you know that the resistance of a wire will be proportional to its length, because R is equal to rho L by A, right? So resistance is proportional to the length. So due to this, if I know the length of the segment AB, I can calculate its resistance. Similarly, if I know the length of the segment BC, I can calculate the resistance for that. Okay, now with this in mind, I can easily write the two resistances as follows. So my P, let's say the P is the resistance between A and B. So P can be written as how much? P is equal to rho into L by A into, P is equal to rho into L by A, and similarly Q can be written as rho into 100 minus L by A. If I just divide P and Q, I find that P by Q is equal to L by 100 minus L. Okay, you should take this into consideration. Once this is done, now we can apply the condition for the balance of the Wheatstone bridge, and you get that R into Q is equal to P into X. Here X is nothing but your S that I have chosen in the Wheatstone bridge. So I'll just write this in the common notation. So what this means is, your X is nothing but R into Q by P, or your X is nothing but 100 minus L by L into R. Okay, here X is equal to your resistance S that is unknown. S is the unknown resistance as I've mentioned here before. So the final formula that you arrive at is your unknown resistance, which is given by S, is equal to 100 minus L divided by L into R, where this length is the length between AB is L and the length between VC is 100 minus L. Note that the first length is on the side of the resistance box. L will be taken as this side, and you can take the unknown side as 100 minus L. So this is the formula that you should remember from this, and we will look at some other problems to make a better sense of it. In the circuit shown, a 4-wire potentiometer is made of a 400 centimeter long wire which extends between the points A and B. The resistance per unit length of the potentiometer wire is R is equal to 0.01 ohm per centimeter. If an ideal voltmeter is connected as shown with the jockey J at 50 centimeter from end A, the expected reading of the voltmeter will be what? Which of these? So as you can clearly see in the diagram and from the given data that has been provided, you can see that the resistance of the potentiometer wire, the resistance of potentiometer wire is nothing but the resistance per unit length into the total length, 0.01 into 400 is equal to 4 ohms. So the total resistance is 4 ohms. Now in order to find the current in the wire, let's find the current in the wire. What is it given by? I is equal to V by RT. Okay. RT is the total resistance that is there. So what is the total resistance? You basically have to add the resistance of the wire plus the resistance that has been, the internal resistance that has been given for the cell, 0.5, plus another internal resistance that has been given, 0.5 again, and what else is given? A 1 ohm resistance is given. Look, these are the resistances. Okay, and one for the wire. And the V is already known, so it's 1.5 plus 1.5 because they are adding in series and they are of the same polarity. So I have the voltage as 3. So I can get current is equal to half ampere. Now I know that my V is equal to I into R between AJ. Okay, resistance between AJ. So this is nothing but half into 0.01 into 50, because 50 centimeter length has been given, is equal to 0.25 volts. Finally, let's look at the potentiometer. So my potentiometer is having a lot of applications. For example, you can find the EMF of an unknown cell and compare EMF of two cells. You can find unknown resistance and many other applications. So let's begin. The basic circuit of a potentiometer is very simple. You have a battery providing an EMF and it has an internal resistance small r. Okay, and you have a potentiometer wire of length capital L. Okay, this wire has a resistance R. Now from the wire you can see that the potential drop across the wire is equal to the current I into the resistance of the wire. Okay, so this is an important thing that you should remember from here, that you can easily find a potential gradient. So as you start moving from the point A to the point B, your potential starts to drop. Okay, so at every point on the entire potentiometer wire, what you find is you can find a different value of potential. So this has a different value, this has V prime, this has V double prime, and different values of potentials are there till you reach the end. So there is a linear relationship here. So the potential gradient which is defined as X, is nothing but the potential difference per unit length of the wire. Okay, so this is given by X is equal to VA minus VB divided by L, which is nothing but your current into R by L. You should also make a note of this, as this will be used when you start the applications. So there are 2 or 3 prominent applications of the potentiometer. The first one is to find the EMF, electromotive force, of an unknown cell and compare the EMF of 2 cells. So you have the normal primary circuit of the potentiometer. Now what you do is you add a secondary circuit to it. Okay, this was my point A, this was my point B, and this was my wire. And what you do is you apply this second circuit, and then there is a galvanometer attached here. And what you do is you try to have a jockey here, and then you try to move it along the wire AB. Okay, so there are 2 cases. In case 1, point 1 in the system, look, you are supposed to find the unknown EMF of this cell. Let's say this has an EMF E1, E2, and the internal resistance as R2. Okay, so you have different points. You have the point 1, you have the point 2, and you have the point 3, where you can attach the galvanometer. Okay, so in the case 1, the point 1 is attached to 2, so this circuit is completed. Okay, so if this circuit is completed, then there is a balance length which is L1. Okay, and using the potential gradient, I can write that epsilon 1 is equal to X times L1. Similarly, if in this figure I join 3 to 2, this thing, then what happens is the current will flow through this branch. Okay, and my epsilon 2 can be written as, let me call this as epsilon 1 and this as epsilon 2. Okay, so I can write my epsilon 2 as X into whatever length I get in the potentiometer wire. Okay, so these are the 2 circuits. In the first one, what was happening is when I connected 1 and 2, my current came and current flew through this path. Okay, because this is open right now. And in the second one, current flew through the second EMF or the second battery. Given these, if you have the balance length for both the configurations, then you can find the ratio between the 2 EMFs. If one of these 2 is known, then the other one can be found. And if you already know what is X, then you can found each of them. Questions have been asked on these before, so you should take a note of this, and let's see if we can practice some problems on it or not. The next application is to find the current if the resistance is known. So what you do is, this is your primary circuit again of the potentiometer. You add this secondary circuit to it. Again, there is a galvanometer and a jockey attached, and there are 2 resistances, R1 and R2. So let the point at which this is touching the potentiometer wire be C. So what we have is the potential that drops between these 2 points is written as the potential gradient into the length between these 2 points. Let the length be L1. So VA minus VC is equal to L1, and we can easily see that this potential drop is similar to the drop across this. Okay, so you have IR1 is equal to X times L1, the same thing. That implies my current can be given as XL1 by R1. Similarly, we can find this for the case of R2 as well. Okay, given this, we find that the potentiometer is ideal. Potentiometer is an ideal voltmeter because it does not draw any current from the circuit at the balance point. Okay, so this is the advantage of a potentiometer over a ideal voltmeter. The next application is to find the internal resistance of a cell. Questions have been asked from this as well before. So just remember, there are 2 arrangements. They're not very different. So this is the primary coil, sorry, this is the primary circuit. Again, this is the secondary circuit. What you do is, you know that the potential drop across these points is the same as these points. Okay, so you have, by the first arrangement, you see that if you attach your your battery to this circuit, you have epsilon is equal to x times L1 potential gradient into the length. And by the second arrangement, what you've done is you've attached a battery with a known resistance in parallel to it. Okay, any of the two can come. In the second arrangement, you have IR is equal to x times L2, because IR is the potential drop across this, but because these are in parallel, so it is the same thing across this and across this. So all of these have the same potential drops. Okay, so I can easily write I as XL2 by R2. Also, I can write my current as epsilon prime by R prime plus R, where R prime was the internal resistance of this. Okay, given this, there is, I can easily find a relation between epsilon prime and the length L2. Okay, similarly, I can find a relation between XL1 and XL2. And the final thing that I want you to remember is my internal resistance is nothing but L1 minus L2 divided by L2 into R. So what do we do? In the first case, we do not attach resistance to its toward the parallel of the thing. We only attach the cell, and in the next, and we find the value on the potentiometer wire, which is L1. For the second case, we attach a known resistance R, and then we again find the value, and later we use this formula to find what is the internal resistance of the cell. Note also that ammeter and voltmeter can be graduated by the potentiometer. Also, ammeter and voltmeter can be calibrated by the potentiometer. So there are many benefits of using the potentiometer. Let us take a look at another question from meter bridge. So the resistance of the meter bridge AB in the given figure is 4 ohms. Okay. So the resistance of AB, let me just write these values down. So my resistance for AB is given as 4 ohm. Now with a cell of EMF, epsilon is equal to 0.5 V and rheostat resistance is equal to 2 ohms, the null point is obtained at some point J. When the cell is replaced by another one of EMF epsilon 2, the same null point is found for another value of rheostat resistance, which is given as 6 ohms. I am trying to find the second EMF. So how do we proceed with this? First of all, you just write whatever is given to you. In the first case, your EMF is 0.5 volts. Okay, and your rheostat is given to be of 2 ohms. Okay, so the first step that you will use, the first step that you will do is find the potential gradient of the wire AB, because that will be used if you want to find what is the resistance in the AJ length. Okay, so dV by dL is nothing but 6, which is the total potential drop across it, divided by 2 plus 4, because because these two are in series. The RH and your entire AB is in series. Next, what you do is you multiply it by 4 by L, and that is it. Next step will be, I'll first mark this equation. Now to find the null point, let's say the null point is at a distance L from A. Okay. Now due to this, we can write that the EMF epsilon 1 is equal to 0.5 V is equal to 6 by 2 plus 4 into 4 by L into small l. Okay. This is for the null point to take place. Similarly, in the second case, what happens is my RH becomes 6 ohm. So the new potential gradient dV by dL, new potential gradient is what? It is given by 6 by 4 plus 6. Why? Because the resistance of AB remains 4, but the resistance of RH has become 6 now. Okay, and for writing this, we consider this loop. This is enough to write this thing. So 6 by 4 plus 6 into 4 divided by L. Okay, and again at the null point, what will happen is it gets given that the null point remains the same when the RH is increased. So at the null point, we have that epsilon 2 is equal to so we got two equations. If you just divide these two equations, what do you get? You get 0.5 divided by epsilon 2 is equal to 10 divided by 6, which implies epsilon 2 is nothing but 0.5.